The second book is a little bit more than 200 years, 210 years. The third book covers the span of about 1 month, right? From when they built the Mishkan, from when they built the tabernacle until the opening part of our book, which is the first of the second month. So it's actually probably even less than a month. If you talk about the third book, because the third book is primarily teachings. There's not much plot. The plot of the third book is only 1 day, the first of Nisan, when they consecrated the tabernacle. So again, first book, about 2,200 years. Second book, about 210 years. Third book, 30 days or less, depending on how you count. And then you get to the fourth book, which we're starting today. And the fourth book is discuss about 39 years, a little bit less, the 39 years that the Jewish people spent in the wilderness, in the desert. And that's why the Hebrew name of the book, the name that is referred to today, is Bamidbar, in the wilderness, because that's the book of the wilderness. So it's 38 years. And of course, the final book is really repetition. Moshe repeating the stories and some of the laws is, again, the final book is about 37 days. So again, the first book is 2,200 years approximately. Second book is approximately 210 years. Third book is approximately 1 month. Fourth book that we're starting now is approximately 39 years. And the final book of the Torah, the repetition, is about 37 days. So that's just to give an overview. And in some sense, the fourth book, the book we're starting now, in some sense could be seen as the purpose of the Torah. Because if you think about it, the first book were primarily a family. It's the story of the patriarchs, the matriarchs, the tribes, primarily a family. Second book, we become a people. We get the Torah. The third book is a wonderful book, but it describes how you come close to God, how you enter the temple. The fourth book is how do you take the holiness of the temple and bring it to the wilderness, which is a metaphor for the rest of the world. So the purpose of creation really is the fourth book. The fifth book is just repetition. So in some sense, the fourth book is the climax of the entire Torah. Now, the real world is complicated and messy, and therefore the fourth book is very problematic. There's a lot of trouble that erupts. In other words, it's a complicated, the plot complicated, it becomes very complicated because it is a difficult task. It's easier to go to the temple and to bring the values of the temple to everyday life. So the third book is not much drama, not much difficulty. The fourth book is complicated. And the contrast is that the beginning of the fourth book, this parsha and next, begins with a tremendous amount of order. It's all about numbers. It's all about how the Jewish people organize around the tabernacle. You would think that these people are like, they would say in Yiddish, they're like the Yekes, they're German Jews. They are exact. And very quickly in the book, the entire thing erupts. Moses can't get anything done. Wherever he goes, there's disputes and everybody's fighting and no one can get along and everybody's pulling in another direction. So it's very chaotic, the fourth book. But the reality is that in that sense, it looks like a negative book, but ultimately that's the purpose. If we can work through the chaos, work through the wilderness, and bring the holiness of the Torah into the wilderness. So that's just an introduction to understand where we are in the 5 books of Moses and the journey we're beginning through the wilderness. So one more little introduction. At this point, the journey in the wilderness is not supposed to take a long time. We're supposed to go, once we start moving in 2 portions from now, we're supposed to go straight to Israel. But then there was the debacle of the spies, also in the 4th book, and that delays it for 40 years, which is really 39 years, thinking about when the story happens. And that is also an important part of the plot of the 4th book. So that's the story in short so far. That's the introduction to the introduction. Any comments or questions, please share. Otherwise, we go straight to the Parsha in a nutshell. Okay, in the Sinai desert, that's the opening phrase. God speaks to Moses in the Sinai desert. In the Sinai desert, God says to conduct a census of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moses counts 603,550 men of draftable age, 20 to 60 years. This is all the tribes, excluding the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi was not counted with the rest of the people. The tribe of Levi, numbering 22,300 males age 1 month and older, is counted separately. The Levites are to serve in the sanctuary. They replace the firstborn, whose number they approximated, since they were disqualified when they participated in the worshiping of the golden calf. The 273 firstborn who lacked a Levite to replace them had to pay a 5 shekel ransom to redeem themselves. Okay, this is a little bit of a complicated story. It's really the end of the parsha. And what happens is like this. Initially, who was supposed to serve in the temple? It was supposed to be the Bechorim, the firstborn. And a lot of commentators talk about that the firstborn, the model of the firstborn serving in the temple is the preferred model. And you can talk about later why that's the preferred model. But what happens was when the Jewish people served the golden calf and they sinned with idol worship, the firstborn also sinned. And therefore they forfeit their right to serve in the temple. And the only tribe that did not sin was the tribe of Levi. And therefore, the Torah says that the Levites are going to serve the Jewish people, are going to serve God in the temple on behalf of the Jewish people instead of the firstborn. That's what God says previously. And in this parsha, you see it clearly because they count the Levites, they count the firstborn, and they say, you know what, the Levites will be in the place of the firstborn. The problem is that there were more firstborns than Levites by 273 more firstborn than Levites. So they had a ceremony where they sort of that holiness transfers to the coins. Okay, so that's really the end of the parsha. And most of the parsha, the bulk of the parsha, describes the camp. When the people broke camp, the 3 Levite clans dismantled and transported the sanctuary and reassembled it at the center of the next encampment. They then erected their own tents around it. The Kohatites, who carried the sanctuary's vessels, the ark, menorah, in their specially designed coverings on their shoulders, camped to the south. The Gershonites, in charge of its tapestries and roof coverings, to its west, and the families of Merari, who transported the wall panels and pillars, to its north. Before the sanctuary's entranceway to the east were the tents of Moses, Aaron, and Aaron's sons. So what we're getting here is the description of how the Jewish people traveled in the desert. And there were the Levites was the tribe that, as we mentioned, was supposed to serve in the temple. And one of their primary jobs was to transport the temple. And each family, there were 3 families within the Levites. Each family had their own designated part of the temple that they were in charge of transporting. And then when they would camp around the temple. The 3 families would camp on the 3 sides of the temple. And in the east of the temple, in other words, the 4th side, was Aaron and his sons, the priests, not the Levites. Beyond the Levite circle, the 12 tribes, it's really this 3rd section, which takes up the bulk of the parsha. Beyond the Levite circle, the 12 tribes camped in 4 groups of 3 tribes each. To the east was Judah, population 74,000, Yisachar 54,000, and Zebulun. To the south was Reuben, Simon, and Gad. To the west was Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin. And to the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. This formation was kept also while traveling. Each tribe had its own Nasi, prince of leader, and its own flag with its tribal color and emblem. So we have here, it's a very detailed parsha, very, very technical, all about numbers, we have a count of how much each tribe, how many people were in each tribe. And then we have the number, because each 3 tribes comprised the camp. So how many people, what was the subtotal, and then what was the total, and then what was the total of all the Jewish people. So you have a lot of numbers, and you have an exact order of how they were supposed to camp around the temple in the center, and the 4 camps comprising 3 tribes apiece are in the 4 directions, on the 4 sides. And that was the order that they kept, not only when they camped in the desert, but also when they traveled. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. There's not much more to say because it's all numbers. And that's it. That's it. We can all go home because it's not so relevant right now because we're not traveling through the desert. Of course, I'm joking. While literally that is true, literally with the amount of Levites and the amount of each person, each tribe is not relevant to us today, but the spiritual and the moral teachings and lessons from this parsha, like all parshas, are very much relevant to us today. In this parsha, you do have to dig a little bit deeper to try to find the connection, because a lot of this seems like it was just for the desert, the period when they traveled to the desert. But that's why we're here. We get together and we could start thinking about what is the idea of what's the lesson for us today, because that's really the most important question.
Rabbi, can I ask a question?
Please.
Where are the mixed multitude?
That is a wonderful question. That is a very, very, very good question. That's a very, very good question. The reason why it's such a good question is because one of the reasons is because a few portions ago, 3 portions ago, Emor, we never got to it on this class, but Emor, there was a story where there was a Jewish man who cursed God and he was killed for cursing God. There's a backstory. Why did he curse God? So the Torah says his mother was Jewish, his father was Egyptian. That's what the Torah says. And the rabbis fill in the story. They basically said like this: he went to the tribe of his father. He went to the tribe of his mother and he said, I'm part of your tribe. They said, no, you're not, because the tribes follow the father. And your father is not Jewish. Your father was an Egyptian. So this person was so upset, he went to the court. The court said, we can't help you. He was so upset and he cursed God. And the rabbis view that story, a terrible story, but the rabbis view that story as a critique of the Jewish people who did not make that person feel comfortable amongst them. So that shows that there was indeed a tension between people who were not part of a formal tribe, that there was a little bit of a problem. Now, I think the answer to your question is, I'm not sure. I think the answer to the question is that they lived amongst the other tribes, which was fine. The problem was if they wanted to be a member of the tribe, which ultimately would have certain privileges, especially once they come to Israel and they would get a portion in the land. So you bring up a very, very touchy subject, but that's good. So the short answer is that they were not counted as members of the tribe, because here you'll see clearly that they counted every male, and they counted to their families, to the father's home. They would count you, and you would have to say your lineage through the patriarchal line all the way back to I guess Jacob. So there were certainly people who were not included in this camp and in this accounting. And even though it's not recorded in the story, right now, you already know in the previous book that there's already some tension. So whenever there's trouble, there's because before that there's tension brewing, and probably that's part of the tension that we're going to expect in the 4th book. Part of it is probably from the mixed multitudes, because people don't feel accepted. People don't feel that they have a space, and then you don't know where it can explode. I don't want to get political, but okay, I'm not going to get political. Fine, forget it. But I can't resist. So now the big problem in Israel now is that there are people within Israel, the Arab cities that have Arabs and Jews living together for many years, many decades, and now there's just total chaos and riots. And some of these cities like Lod, I spent a year there, and we lived together in peace amongst the Arabs. And it's a big issue. This is tragic, and it's not clear why this is happening. But what is clear is that it's a mixture of reasons. It's not one thing. It's a mixture of things. And what's also clear is that things don't explode overnight. They explode overnight, but there's tension under the surface for many years, or if not decades. So life is complicated, and that's part of what we have to do in the book of Numbers, is to try to work out the complications through the values of the Torah. So thank you, Steve.
Rabbi, didn't they all accept the Torah at Sinai? So they basically were Jewish, right?
They were Jewish. 100%.
But they belonged to the tribe.
100%. A person who converted, this person, forget about it, his mother was Jewish. Shlomit Bat Ivri, we know who he was. but his father was Egyptian. And you'll see in the verse that we count, when it comes to the tribes, the tribes are divided based on the patriarchal line, and therefore this person did not have a lineage. So again, I'm telling you the story. The story is a critique. The rabbis critique, sages critique the Jewish people at the time for not doing enough to make them feel accepted. But that's the story. So the verses in this parsha paints a scene of order and tranquility. Steve says that I'm saying based on Steve's question that there's probably some tension under the surface, and the tension will explode very quickly, not just because of the mixed multitudes, because of other issues, as we will get to beginning in the third parsha of this book, which is very soon after this book, because next parsha, there's no plot. We just continue counting the Levites, and there's some laws. But then the moment you have to start traveling, boom, what's supposed to be order explodes into problem after problem after problem. It's it's nonstop. It's actually pretty amazing. And we want to really get to what is at the heart of all that tension. And ultimately, according to some opinions, the roots of that tension is really in this week's parsha. The roots of the tension, I'll spill the beans right now. Some people say the roots of the tension is that you took away the priesthood from the firstborn and you give it to the Levites, which means there's a specific family that serves God, that serves the temple, and the rest of the people feel more alienated. And that's why they start complaining. Not because they're complaining because they want the meat. They're complaining because there's an underlying issue. The underlying issue, it used to be every family had a priest. So that really connected you to the service of the temple because someone in your family represented you in the temple. Here, you make it a tribal thing. The tribe of Levi serves in the temple. That brings about its own problems. And some people believe that a lot of the tension that was going to explode in two portions in Baalotcha, where the people start complaining. And the culmination is, because we have to read that parsha to get to this, the culmination is that Moshe says we need 70 prophets. And the culmination of that parsha, Moshe says, I wish everybody can be a prophet. So you see what the people were asking for is not so much meat. They were asking for meat, but what was really bothering them is they felt pushed away from the service in the temple. And that had ramifications. But as you know, whenever somebody comes to complain, it's usually never what they're complaining about. There's always something deeper. So when the Jewish people come to Moses and say, Moses, we want meat, what they're really saying is we want prophecy. You see what I'm saying? You always have to look what's at the heart. You're not happy. When you're not happy, you complain about everything. But why are you really not happy? Right? So that's what happened. My child comes home and says, I don't like supper. I'm not eating. Okay, so okay, we'll find you a different supper. But you really have to ask what happened in school. That's the real question. Doesn't matter what, in other words, it's almost never, whenever there's an eruption, it's almost never what's on the surface. It's almost never the surface. Almost always there's a deeper desire and a deeper need and a deeper concern that you have to get to. And that is, according to some opinions, is what's happening in the fourth book. Okay, so let's talk about the census for a minute because this is something that appears a few times in the Torah, and this is something that the Hasidic commentaries love to talk about. So we'll talk about it very quickly, and then we'll try to get a little deeper here. So this is probably things that you have heard before, but we'll try to do this quickly. Okay, so I'm just going to share the screen, and of course the problem with this census is that there already was a census 30 days ago. I'm sorry, there was a census a few months before. So why the need for a new census? In America, we have a census, every 10 years, okay? And then we go to court and we fight about the census. It's exciting, keeps people busy, keeps the lawyers busy. But the point here is nobody ever heard of a census every few months. So that's the question. That's really the opening question. So I'm opening up this is the first verse in our parsha. The Lord spoke to Moses in the Sinai desert in a tent of meeting on the first day of the second month, in the second year after the exodus from the land of Egypt, saying, so it's the second year. It's really a month and a half. It's really a month and a half after that. I'm sorry, a year and a half a month. In other words, it's the first anniversary plus 2 weeks. They left Egypt in the 15th of the first month, and this is the first of the second month. So what does God say? Look at verse 2. Take the sum of all the congregation of the children of Israel by families following their fathers' houses, a head count of every male according to the number of their names. So that was the verse I mentioned earlier, following their fathers' houses. In other words, we're counting the lineage of the tribal lineage follows the father, even though whether or not a person is Jewish follows the mother, but the tribe follows the father, as Rashi says right here where I'm pointing, following their father's house. If one's father was from one tribe and his mother from another tribe, he is counted with his father's tribe. That's what Rashi says. Okay, now the question becomes, why are we counting that? Why are we counting at this point? The Lord spoke in the Sinai desert on the first of the month. The shaded box is Rashi. Says Rashi, because they were dear to him, he counted them often. Okay, so why does God keep wanting a census? Because a census is a expression of the love of God to the people. When you have something precious, you keep counting them, even if you know the number. Where do you see that God keeps counting them? When they left Egypt, he counted them. When many fell because of the sin of the golden calf, he counted them to know the number of the survivors. So this was just 40 days, just a few months after the Exodus. When they left Egypt, there was a census. 2 months later, when they served the idol, there was a census. And now, just a few months later, when he came to cause his divine presence to rest among them, he counted them. On the first of Nisan, the Mishkan was erected, and on the first of Iyar, he counted them. So that's the Rashi. So we have 3 countings in a little bit more than a year. So it seems inefficient. Why are you spending all that time counting? And Rashi's answer is, well, because it's a sign of love, because God cherishes the people, therefore he continuously counts them. That's Rashi. Now, all the Hasidic commentaries are all over this idea. They love this idea, and they talk about something interesting. Counting, on one hand, when you count, you're not highlighting. What are you highlighting when you count? When you count, you don't look at the individual specific qualities. You don't say, well, Moses is a great guy, we'll count him as a few. Well, this guy is not so great, we'll count him as half, right? When you count, the act of counting actually equalizes. It actually says everybody is the same. That Moses, the greatest Jew, and the most simplest Jew are both equal. That's what you get when you count, because when you count, you're not looking at the differences between the individuals. You're looking at what they all have in common. What do they all have in common? Well, what they all have in common is the soul, is the core of the person, which is the soul. And the souls are all equal. The souls are all part of God. And therefore, when you count the people, what you're really doing is you're helping each person get in touch with that part of themselves, which makes them equal with everybody else, which is the soul. And that's why, we don't want to get into the details, but that's why they were counted when they left Egypt, when they sinned, and then when God builds the temple, because these are times where people have to get in touch with their inner core. And getting in touch with the inner core happens through the Exodus, because that's the meditation of the Exodus. That's what you realize. You realize that you are one and Moses is one. You and Moses are the same, because we're not looking at my external faculties in here. You may be smarter than me. You may be wealthier than me. You may be more pretty than me. You may have more qualities than I have. That's true all on the surface level. But if we're looking at the core, everybody is one and everybody is the same. So one person is not greater than the other, and that's the process of counting, and that's the chipa. That is the love that is expressed when we count. Okay, that's a wonderful meditation. And that's the meditation is really about the other censuses. What happens here is very interesting, because on one hand, we count every individual, and the counting is equalizing. On the other hand, we say we're counting you as part of a tribe. And the 12 tribes of Israel represent division. Certainly the tribe of Levi, you're separate from all the other 12. So here is a balance. And this is a very deep balance that Judaism always tries to walk. On one hand, we want to look at the common soul that every person has and feel that we're just the same as everybody else. In other words, they're not better than us, we're not better than them. Everybody's part of God, everyone has a soul. On the other hand, we have to realize that everybody is unique. Everybody has their unique qualities and has their unique gift and their own purpose and mission. And the question is, could you have both those ideas together, right? Some people just look at the common. Some people just look at what differentiates, what makes us unique. But Judaism says you have to have both of those simultaneously. You have to realize that when it comes to the core, you're the same as everybody else. But when it comes to your specific mission, there's also an area where you are unique. And it's not helpful just to say, oh, I'm like everybody else. I don't have my own unique talents and my own unique perspective. You have to cultivate that unique perspective. On the other hand, if everyone's cultivating their own unique perspective, there's no shared values, right? You see what's going on in Israel now. So you have a society where there are many different groups of people. And the question is, if you highlight what we all have in common, then you're not focusing on the individual community or the individual culture. So you're getting unity. That was the first few decades of Israel. The culture was very united, but the price they paid was that they did not allow the various groups to express their own identity, and therefore the people coming from the Oriental countries and from the East were sort of shunned because they were trying to make one uniform culture. On the other hand, if you cultivate every individual's own culture and own talents and own perspective, then you lose the unifying character, the unifying story that will keep the entire country together. And that's what's happening now, which is a tremendous problem. What the Torah is telling you is we're going to count all the people, but we're also going to count this specifically and remind you, you are of a specific tribe. So you have two things going on together. On one hand, you're part of the collective people. On the other hand, you have your own specific tribe. And having those both together is the first time it was done. This has not been done in the previous two censuses of the Jewish people. That's the idea of the book of Numbers. If you want to be able to survive and push through and go forward and achieve what you need to achieve in the world, you have to have both those ideas in your head. On one hand, we each have a common theme, we each have a soul, we're each the same, we each have a part of God. On the other hand, we're each part of an additional tribe, which is a nice way of saying each of us have our own specific mission and our own specific perspective, and we have to be able to balance both of those together. So that's by way of introduction. That's one idea. Now we could start the class now that it's 10:30.
And the other difference is they don't use these shekels. They don't use.
That's a good question. That's the good question. My daughter asked me the question today. Rashi says through shekels because we have a problem. The problem is that we know that you're not supposed to count people. If you look at the Rashi, I don't know. I don't think Rashi knows it from. I don't know what Rashi knows. We have to look at the commentaries. But Rashi says legulgulotam, a head count, Hebrew legulgulotam, by means of shekels, a beka, half a shekel per head lagulgolet. This quote, a beka lagulgolet, comes from a different census, from the census in the book of Exodus after the sin of the golden calf. So they would give a half shekel. That's what Rashi is saying now. How he sees this from this verse, I don't know if he sees it from this verse or he sees it from the verse, or he sees it from from other verses. In other words, we know the general idea is that you're not supposed to count people. You count something instead. Each person gave a half a census, half a coin, and they counted the coins. So it could be Rashi's just getting it from the other places where it says it and applying it here as well. I don't know. We have to check it out. But in any case, Rashi says that it was done through a shekel. And he says, Beka. Beka is the weight of a half a shekel. Okay. Okay, let's start the parsha. To start the parsha, it gets very boring. So first you have the leaders of the tribes, because the leaders of the tribes helped Moses and Aaron count. Okay, so that's where you have the leaders of the tribes. Then you start counting, and then they start the counting. So what do you have? Children of Reuven. And it gives you the lists of Reuven. And then it goes Shimon, Levi, etc. Goes through all the tribes. After that, he says, don't count the Levites. And then it says, of interesting verse, we'll get back to this verse, verse 52. The children of Israel shall encamp, each man by his own camp, and each man by his division. I have no idea who translated this. Ishach machaneu, each one by his camp. Ve'ish al digloi. They're translating each man by his division. Literally, a degel is a flag. Everybody has their own flag. Let's see votam to their armies. In other words, the children of Israel are divided into camps. Each camp has a flag, and that flag is going to repeat itself again and again. And hopefully today we'll discuss a little bit the Kabbalah of what the flag represents. Oh, here's another verse, beautiful. God spoke to the Moses and Aaron saying, the children of Israel shall encamp, each man by his division, with the flagstaffs of their father's house. Some distance from the tent of meeting they shall encamp. And now we start getting the division. So you have the Oyel, the tent of meeting, which is the sanctuary. This is in the center of the camp. Then to the east, those encamping in front of the east were the legions under the division of the camp of Judah, the prince of the children of Judah, Nachshon son of Aminadav. So you have Judah. And then you have, together with Judah, verse 5, encamping next to him was Yisachar. And then together with him was Zevulun. So in the east, you have Judah, Yisachar, and Zevulun. And then we go to, then you have the whole camp, the sum of the entire camp in verse 9. And then you go to, after we did the east, we go to the south. Who's at the south? You have Reuven, et cetera, et cetera. So you see the pattern. The pattern is, we say the temple is in the center. You have the three tribes on each, you have three tribes in each camp and four camps around, and they live happily ever after. That's the first half of the parsha, all the way to the fourth reading. Okay, what is this? What is happening here? Why is it so important to think about the division and the order and exactly where each tribe went and the fact that they had flags? So we have a lot to unpack. We don't have a lot of time, but we have a lot to unpack. So let's start for this point. Let's start for a second and think about this based on what we said earlier. That up till this point, there was just a census, and everybody was just counted as the collective Jewish people. And this parsha is the first time we could start talking about individual tribes, counting individual tribes separately. Why? So one answer is because when you count tribes, you're highlighting the differences between people. You cannot emphasize the differences between people before there is a strong unifying factor. What's the unifying factor? The temple in the center. Once there's the temple in the center, now you could say, you're on the east, I'm on the west, he's in the north, she's in the south. Everybody is different. We have different tribes, we have different families. We could divide in that way because we have a temple, because we realize that we're all an extension of the same central point. So before we had that temple in the center, the Torah would say, no, it's too dangerous to count the Jews as specific tribes, even though we had different tribes, but we weren't divided in that way. Each tribe has its own army. Each tribe has its own flag. That is really highlighting the divisions between people, which in some sense is important because you have to highlight the unique contribution of every tribe and therefore of every individual in each tribe. But again, the only way you can do that is you can do that once you have a strong center, once you have the image that there's a temple in the center, temple represents God dwelling in the camp, and then there's different ways how the center branches out, but with all branches from the same central point. So that's the first idea. Now, once we have that idea, we continue to my favorite idea of this parsha. I think I say it every year, but I'll try to get there. I'll try to get in and out of this idea within 60 seconds, if not 60 seconds, 120 seconds. So the question, of course, becomes, I'm not traveling through the desert. I don't have the 12 tribes. What do I care that Judah was in front and Reuben was on the side, and each? What do I care where these tribes were around the temple? So there's a beautiful, absolutely creative interpretation from the Kli Yakar. Kli Yakar is the great 17th century Kabbalist he was a commentator. He was also a Kabbalist, a student of the Maharal of Prague, chief rabbi of Prague, and of course, he is the great-grandfather of Pam, who's on the call now, so thank you, Pam. And he says this profound idea. He says the reason why the Torah tells us how the tribes represent camp around the temple is because it's a very important teaching to each and every individual. And basically, we each have the center, we have our core, but then we have multiple values in our life. Throughout our life, we try to achieve and be successful in many different arenas. And sometimes those values that we try, those things that we try to be successful at, sometimes those values contradict because you can't be everything. You can't be everything all the time to all people. So if you want to be good at one thing, you can't be good at something else. If I want to be a doctor, it's wonderful, but I cannot be in law school at the same time. If I want to be a law school, I can't be an accountant, right? So anytime you're committing to something, but in a sense, you're sacrificing something else. And we have competing values. I want to be successful in my home. I want to be successful in the world, in the workplace. I want to be successful as a parent, as a child. We got all kinds of things we want to do, and we have a very limited amount of time. So according to the Kli Yakar, what the Torah is really telling us here is telling us how to organize our values. And the beautiful thing that Kli Yakar is going to say is he says, what it's telling us is all the values that we're going to mention are all holy. They all branch out. They're all just as close to the center. In some sense, all those values are important, right? Because even the guy who's on the west in the back, he's just as close to the temple as the person in the east listed first. Because that's the idea. When you have a circle around the temple, everybody is just as close to the actual temple. So all these values are important. Nevertheless, you have to have a hierarchy of values. What are these values? So without getting into how the tribes represent these values, which we can do that if we had time, we can open a Kli Yakar and see, they even have it in English. The Kli Yakar says like this: the first group mentioned first, Judah, represents wisdom. After wisdom, you have the quality of, so wisdom is intellectual quality. You want to expand your wisdom. After that, he says, is midot, is character traits. The next three tribes excelled in their positive character traits. After that was physical strength. And finally, the last group excelled in material wealth. And you ask yourself, what's more important? Okay, and they're all important. Is it more important to have wisdom or wealth? I have a bad joke that my uncle used to say. Terrible, terrible, terrible joke. Terrible, terrible, terrible joke. But I'll say it anyway, because I can't resist. He says, once upon a time, God comes to a man and says, I want to give you, I want in a dream. And he says, I want to bless you. And you have a choice. You can get wisdom or wealth. Which one do you want? He says, God, I'm not sure. This is a hard one. Let me think about it. Come back in 3 days. God comes back in 3 days. What do you want, wisdom or wealth? So he says, well, I want wisdom. And God says, okay, when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be wise. And he wakes up in the morning, and the first thought that pops into his head is, he got the wisdom. The first thing he says, I should have said wealth. Okay, that was just a joke. But the bottom line here is that it's interesting. You have number 3 and number 4. You have wealth, but you also, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Physical strength or wealth, right? Is it more important to be wealthy or more important to be healthy? Right? Some people pursue wealth to the extent that they can't pursue, they don't have time to take care of their own health. They don't have time to exercise. They don't have time to go to the gym. So we see you have different values here. You have wisdom, you have developing a good character, emotional, in other words, your emotional traits, in other words, be a nice, kind person. Some people are very wise, they're not kind. Some people are very kind, they're just not that smart. You go to them when you want a kind word, but you're not going to go to them for an idea, right? So everybody has, the different people excel in different things. What the Kli Yakar is saying is that everybody, all these values are true, are good if they are around the temple. Is it good to care about your health? Is it good to care about your wealth? Is it good to care about wisdom? The answer, it depends. If it's an extension of the temple. If what I really want is a connection to God. To be able to serve God, I need wisdom. To be able to serve God, I need wealth. To be able to serve God, I need to be healthy. To be able to serve God, I need to feel good. To be able to serve God, I need to have a good character. That's wonderful. But it's all around the temple. When it's all around the temple, then that shows how I can live a life where the competing values are really not crashing into each other, because there's a unity within all of those. And the unity is it's all serving a deeper purpose, which is the temple itself. And having said that, the fact that the Torah, even though it's a circle, the Torah, everyone's just as close to the temple, but the Torah does mention Judah first, east first, and then south, and then west, and then north. That's showing you that there is a hierarchy. They're all important, but there is a hierarchy. And a hierarchy, wealth is the last. Above wealth is health. Right? You can have all the money in the world, but if you're not healthy, you can't enjoy it. And you'll spend all the money in your world. King Solomon says, no matter how much money you have in the bank, you'll empty your account to get health. Right? So that shows you that you understand that health is a greater value than wealth. And then above that is character, being a good person. And above that is enlightenment, is wisdom, connection to understanding God. That's the highest. So you have these 4 values. The point is there is a hierarchy. The point is they're all important. They're all critical for the service of God, provided that they're surrounding the temple. In other words, money for itself is not a value. Even wealth for itself is not a value. Health is not a value. Even wisdom is not a value. Even good character is not a value unless it's here and it's rooted in a deeper value, which is the connection to God. And then there's unity. Then when I'm trying to pursue wisdom and I'm going to the gym, it's not two different parts of me, of myself, because there's a uniting thread in all parts of my day, because all those competing values are driven by an underlying value, which is the temple. I love this idea. Thank you, Kliakar, for this. Okay, now we want to get to a little Kabbalah, which we didn't discuss in the past. Not that I don't think we discussed in the past. So at least if you heard everything I said already so far, and you say, what's going on with the rabbi? He keeps repeating himself. So this is going to be something new. So we want to talk about the flags, and we want to talk about what the flags represent. And there's a whole thing in the Medrash about the flags, and the Medrash goes on and on about the flags. Let's start, because there are different references to flags, both in the book of Psalms and in the book of Song of Songs and in other places throughout the Bible. And I'm just going to give you what the Medrash says. And again, what I'm trying to do here is, first I'm going to tell you what the Medrash says, which sounds a little bit strange. And then I'm going to tell you the Kabbalistic interpretation of what the Medrash is saying. And then hopefully everything's going to make sense. Says the Medrash like this. Once upon a time, the Jewish people came to Sinai. When they came to Sinai, we know that there was a great revelation. God came to Sinai and said, "I'm the Lord your God," gave us the Ten Commandments. According to Moses himself, Moses himself says in Deuteronomy that at the giving of the Torah there was a great revelation. You made it possible to see that the Lord is God, the Lord is one. There was this great spiritual revelation at Sinai. According to the Medrash, according to the other verses in the Bible, including the book of Psalms, when God comes to Sinai, he also comes with all the angels. It's a wedding. You don't show up to the wedding alone. Right? The groom has friends and the bride has friends. You don't show up alone. So God shows up to the wedding. He shows up with all his with all his angels. That's what King David says. I'm pretty sure there's a verse in the Torah that says the same thing. Oh yeah, Rashi, Moses himself says that you don't have to go to King David. In the last portion of the Torah, chapter 2 of Zot HaBracha, Hashem came from Sinai, having shown forth to them from Seir, having appeared from Mount Paran, and then approached with some of the holy myriads. From his right hand, he presented the fiery Torah to them. In other words, when God came at Sinai, he presented the Torah. He came with some of his angels. Okay. Says the Medrash like this. The Jewish people look at the angels and they see that the angels, not all angels are the same. I don't know what they told you in kindergarten. Not all the angels are the same. There are different groups of angels and the different types of angels. Each angel has its own, each camp of angel has their own flag. Says the Medrash, the Jewish people see the angels divided into camps of flags and they're absolutely fascinated. And they desire the flags. And they say, we want flags. And God says, you want flags? Okay, soon in the desert, when you camp around the Mishkan, I'll give you flags. And that's why in this week's Parsha, the Torah keeps emphasizing each tribe will have their own camp and their own flag. The Medrash says the flag, just like the Jewish people desired flags when they saw that the angels had flags. Okay, wonderful. We're not done yet. We're going to travel to the book of the Song of Songs, which is the book that I'm actually very into lately because it's too much fun. My favorite book of the Bible by far. We do the Song of Songs on Friday, so that's a plug. Join us on Friday, 10 a.m. Kabbalah, the Song of Songs. Song of Songs is, of course, the description that it's a love story between a young woman and her beloved. And like all love stories, it's ups and downs. And when he's ready, she's not ready. When she's ready, he's not ready. It's a very complicated relationship. Toward the end of the book, of course, it's a metaphor for the relationship between God and the Jewish people. Toward the end of the book, chapter 7, there's eight chapters in the book. So you have a scene. What is the scene? The scene is that the friends of this girl say she's waiting around for her beloved to come. Nobody knows where he is. He's gone. So they say to her, forget about him. Why don't you join us? You join us and we'll take care of you. And it's basically a metaphor, like Rashi says. That's what the nations of the world told the Jewish people throughout exile. They tell the Jewish people, why are you waiting around for God? God is gone. You join us and we will give you greatness. So I'm going to read the verse. The verse, the verse is, let's see how they translate. Okay, this English, I have a Stone Edition translation, which is an absolute disaster. But, I mean, not the Stone Edition, but the Stone Edition of the Song of Songs, because they don't translate, they just explain, but that's another problem. Okay, we'll try to read the Stone. Why not? The verse says like this: Shuvi Shuvi HaShulamit. Return. This is Song of Songs, chapter 7. Return, return the Shulamit. So it's translated here: the nations have said to me, turn away from God. O nation whose faith in him is perfect. Shulamit comes from the word shalem. So basically, the other girls are telling this girl, return to us. And what's going to happen? The nech zebach, and we shall choose nobility for you. Next, that means we literally can mean look at you, but it means we'll select of you. We'll appoint you to high positions. All you have to do is convert, and you will be able to get appointed to high positions. That's what the Jewish people have been told throughout the entire exile, of course, up to emancipation, when we didn't have to convert to be appointed. But you get the point. The point is the pressure we have the pressures to turn to the nations of the world to follow them instead of following God, and then we'll become great. What does the verse continue? The verse continues. She says like this. She says, but I replied to them, what can you bestow upon a nation whole in faith to him, commensurate with the desert camps encircling? So the verse says like this, what can you do for the Shulamit like the dances of the camps? I don't know what that means. The simple meaning is, she says, yeah, you could do for me, but you can't dance with me like my beloved could. You're not that good. So the Medrash says, so there's all kinds of interpretations what she's saying. But the Medrash, and I'm going to focus on, says like this. The nations of the Jewish people tell the nations of the world, you can appoint greatness to us, but you can't give us what we had in the desert when we were divided into camps, and each camp had its own flag. Okay, so the image of the flag is so powerful. First of all, the Jewish people, that's what they want. They want at Sinai because they see the angels have it. If the angels have it, they want it, and then they get it. But then you have a much more radical medrash. What keeps the Jewish people loyal to God for the past 2,000 years of exile amongst the persecution and pressure? What keeps them loyal is the memory of the flags. You can give us a lot, but you can't give us the flags that we had in the desert when we were divided into camps. That's the medrash. Wonderful. Now I ask you, it's very nice medrash, but what's so exciting about the flag? If you're going to stay Jewish for the past 2,000 years, it's because you have to have a deep connection to God. You have to withstand a lot of pressure. The flag of all the things of Judaism, the flag in the desert, you may have never even heard of the flags. What does this mean? That because we remember the flags in the desert, that's why we remain loyal to God. There's got to be a deeper meaning here. And there is, of course, and that's why we're here. And again, this sheds light to everything that's happening in the parsha from the Kabbalistic perspective, and of course, it makes it relevant for us. So, what is a flag? What is a flag? So, a flag is a few things. A flag, a banner. What does a flag do? A flag, on one hand, is so it unites people, right? If you have a people that have to unite around a certain cause, you have a flag. Now, the flag is also very important, not just for unity in the beginning, but let's say you're going to battle, because they were going to battle now. They were dividing for battle. And you're going to battle, and in battle, there's going to be some degree of dispersion. One guy goes right, one guy goes left. There's confusion. Nobody knows what's going on. You see the banner, you see connected to your purpose, and then you could regroup. So the banner is what allows for the unity around a common purpose and a common cause. That is the concept of a banner in the most physical sense. What does it mean when the Medrash says that the angels are divided into different camps? Because that we know, some angel is basically a spiritual energy that serves God, but it has its own character. So some angels experience love to God. Other angels experience awe. And a human being is complex. We can have both. We can have multiple feelings. We're commanded to love God and to be in awe of God. Angels, they're one-dimensional. So the angels that love God only love God. The angels that are in awe of God are only in awe of God. So there are different camps of angels, but each angel, when you say that the angels also have a flag, what you're saying is like this. What you're saying is every part of the angel is focused on its purpose. Its purpose is to serve God with love, so that permeates its entire personality. That's the flag. Again, the flag represents unifying all parts of the group around the purpose. So when you say when the angels have the flag, means they're constantly aware of their purpose, and that awareness affects everything they do. So the Jewish people are standing at Sinai, and they see the revelation of God, and they see themselves. We're complicated people. We have all kinds of wants, conflicting wants and desires. We're not focused on our purpose, certainly not single-mindedly. And they see the angels. Wow, what are the angels? The angels is their entire personality. Every aspect of their personality is focused and aware constantly of their purpose, of their connection to God, and their spiritual connection to God. And the angels say, we want it too. The Jewish people say, we want it too. God says, you want it? Okay, it's not so simple. You first have to get the Torah. Once we make the Mishkan, once we get the Torah, the tabernacle, then the Torah, when you have the Torah, then you can already have your flag. Because what is a flag? Again, the Torah creates the unity of purpose. First of all, it gives us the awareness of our purpose, but it also helps us connect to that purpose in every area of life. Because as we spoke in the JLI on Tuesday, every area of life is connected to the Torah. Anything you're going to do, there's a way to do it consistent with holiness. Now, let's skip a few generations to the Song of Songs. The Jewish people say, that the nations of the world tell the Jewish people, look, we'll make you a deal. You abandon God, because anyway, we have no idea where your beloved is. The guy is ghosting you. He's not here. He's not answering your phone calls. He's not taking your text messages. He's gone. We don't see him. So why don't you join us? And instead, we give you greatness. It's actually a pretty good deal. And some people went for it. None of us, if we're sitting here, it's because our ancestors withheld the pressures, but it's actually a pretty good deal. And according to the Medrash, it's pretty radical, but the Medrash is saying that we would have taken it. It's a good deal. We want to make a trade-off, but we're not doing it. Why? Because whatever you can give us, any physical or material prestige or comfort or pleasure, it cannot compete with what God gave us at the in the temple, in the desert, and that is the flags. What's the flags? The feeling that a person has purpose and connected to that purpose, and that purpose can fulfill every part of your day, and that your entire day every part of your life is unified by that purpose. So you're not torn up from the inside because you're not being pulled in different directions. That feeling of wholesomeness, that feeling of spiritual connection is something that nations of the world cannot compete with. They can't give us that. So yeah, you can give us comfort, you can make us greatness, you can give us a nice job, you can give us comfort, but you can't give us the feeling of the flag. And again, the flag is the awareness of my purpose and unifying all aspects of my personality around that purpose. And that's what the image here, where you have this, they're grounded by the temple, and all the tribes around the temple, which all the tribes, again, as Kliyakar said, they represent the various aspects of your life and your various aspirations, your aspirations for wisdom, for good character, for wealth, for health, and for wealth, all different parts of yourself, but there's always a flag. And the flag is the ark, the flag is the Torah. In our life, the flag is the Torah, where it unites us with our purpose, makes us aware of our purpose. That's the whole idea of a flag, that you could see it, even amidst the confusion, even amidst the smoke and the fog of battle, you could still see the flag. And the flag will unite everybody in the group around this purpose. So the flag represents constant awareness of who I am, who I'm connected to, what's my purpose in life, and connecting every part of my life with that purpose. And that's a feeling that you cannot replicate anywhere else. And that's a feeling that's why we didn't trade in Judaism, because no other product could compete with that feeling of wholesomeness and feeling of connection and the feeling of comfort that comes from that connection with the unity of God. So there's a lot of goodies out there, but ultimately that's where they can't compete. That's where the nations of the world can't compete, cannot give us what the Torah gives us, the awareness of ourself and our connection and the unity around that awareness. So this, ladies and gentlemen, is the story in short. We're here at 11 o'clock. We have a lot more to say. Come back next year, same time, same place. Hopefully it may be also in person, or if not, online on Zoom. Hopefully we'll be on Zoom then as well. And a lot more to study, and God should give us all good life and good health and good wealth and all the other qualities that the Kliyakar mentioned. And we should all be able to surround and realize that all the values and all the gifts of our life are anchored by the center core of our life, which is the Mishkan, the connection to God. So thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful day and enjoy the beautiful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. Have a good day. Thank you.